You are now tuned into Brave Conversations.
In the meantime, Thibedi.
I don't know if that's the best way to start an interview.
That's always how we start. Ignore it. How you doing, man?
Good. What's up? How's it going?
Chilling. You know how it goes, man.
Yeah.
Shoulder to the grindstone.
Yeah.
Shoulder to the grindstone. I'm glad to be chatting today.
Yeah,
We need
it's
to
awesome.
unpack a couple of things.
Yeah.
And today I want to specifically speak about creativity. I'll speak about your views. I know you got some interesting views on creativity. And I'll start off by kind of your philosophy, your thinking. What does it mean? I think, you and I exchange thoughts every now and then.
Yeah.
But it's nice to get into your head about what's your philosophy? What's your creative philosophy?
Look, so she's right off the bat. Hey, let's go in.
Yes.
So this is something I've been thinking about for quite some time,
Yeah.
right? And the current philosophy I'm working with at the moment really is about embracing change, but also championing change. I think any good philosophy is also inspired by something, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is something that's been in my head for about a good year. It's something that we're starting to get the team working on.
Okay.
But I think specifically with the introduction of AI into our industry, right? I had this niggling question in the back of my mind. Said, ChatGPT is evolving. This technology will only be as bad as it is today.
True.
So it's always going to evolve and get more amazing. And I was asking myself the question, and I asked the creatives that I work with the question is, guys, in the traditional model of advertising, if you're not selling art and copy anymore in the future, what are we going to be selling?
True.
And really that's what informed the philosophy I'm working with right now, which I call advertising, right? So I'm really in the space where I'm interested in unbundling what we understand and advertising to be, what we understand our structures in advertising to be.
And what is that? What do we understand?
Look, I think there's things that you can look at on the ground, right?
Yeah.
So typically back in the day, your traditional structure of creative teams is art director and copywriter.
Right.
Nowadays, potentially there's going to be one guy sitting with the computer, the tools he has, and just has a brilliant mind, can imagine things in different ways, and potentially leverages tools that, work with copy and art direction or visuals. So I think there's already there you start thinking about there are those capabilities. There are people who are going to be those unicorns and can potentially function or perform the function that a two-man team used to do in advertising to perform the same function in today's world.
Got it.
So this idea of advertising really interests me, and I think the thing about it is like I said, let's unbundle what we think we know it to be. But I think that's also a good conversation to introduce young people to.
Absolutely.
So I'm really interested because I think we got into advertising for different reasons. Back in my day, it's funny. I meet young people who are in the industry, and you make reference to an old ad, they don't know. Look, they don't know it's nice.
Different year, different decade,
different era, different time.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to them.
Yeah.
And I find that so fascinating. And I imagine because of the world my 2000 grew up in, and the kind of ads and tech and marketing they were exposed to. What are their views? And I think when I speak about unlearning and unbundling and this idea of advertising, it's also up to us, right, as the people who've been in the game, the industry leaders, to also give them that voice and that space to say, what is your take on advertising? I don't feel I want to be in a position where I should still be dictating how things are done or how it should be. Because that change is going to come and hit us so fast that you won't even know what happened if you don't allow it to be.
But one might also argue that the concept of advertising and creativity is not limited to the advertising and marketing industry, right?
Absolutely.
So the application of the thinking can be in mining, can be in whatever it may be. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you take, and is it possible to take this philosophy and translate it into other spaces and other sectors?
I think so, definitely. So my big thing has always been about this. It's one thing I always challenge and push away when someone says, oh, but you're the creative. I'm like, my view has always been that, we're all creative, right? If you look at the core of the word, which means to create, everyone has ideas. And to your point, creativity is required in any field that you are. The best lawyers have to find creative ways around the law to make it work for them. The best engineers are the ones who come up with the most creative solutions. Same as the best surgeons are the ones who come up with creative solutions to their problems. So I think at the core, that idea or that functionality of ideas and conceptualizing creativity is always going to be what makes you stand out, right? And I think that's the thing that we can hold on to in our space. To go, sure, there's a lot of things that creators might feel threatened about in terms of what's coming out now, but I see it as an opportunity for us to then expand our thinking and horizons, right? Because we can solve different problems for brands and for our clients. It doesn't have to end at a comms solution.
Sure.
So let's apply our minds and our creativity to solving business challenges at large. That can we get into products? Why not? Can we get into tech solutions? It's so crazy when you think about, like, sometimes we see things living in products and we actually forget the genesis is that it's an idea.
Absolutely. Started someone's head.
AI was an idea at some point. And that's the genesis of everything that we do.
So how do you facilitate this, right? So the idea is wonderful that we can potentially use creativity to solve all this stuff. And I always find it very difficult to facilitate or manage a specific process to get to a creative outcome. And one can argue in advertising it may be one way, in mining it may be another. Is there a kind of de facto process you use from a creative point of view to arrive at a creative outcome? Or do you kind of go running in the morning and boom, there it is? How does it work for you?
So it's weird. So this question I also enjoy because, again, the answer is that ideas aren't unique to people, right? And I think obviously you have to be, as a person, in a position where an idea is able to come to you, because there's a beautiful analogy I heard quite some years back about this idea that ideas are always looking for a place to go, right? So the idea doesn't necessarily belong to you, Musa, or me, Thibedi. An idea will come to Thibedi, like you say, whether he's running, whether he's in the shower, or what have you. And if it doesn't find that it can be produced in that vessel, it will move on to the next vessel.
Boss. What do you mean this thing is moving on?
Because ideas, and like I said, look, it's a theory that I read somewhere, but it makes sense to me, absolutely, because sometimes you don't know absolutely where this comes from. Right. There's sources of inspiration that I believe people take, and that for you potentially is what you're setting the playground for you to be able to meet that idea that comes to you and bring it to life. So ideas aren't unique to people per se, right? So my challenge to myself and my team is always, how do you keep a fertile ground for that when an idea does land to you, you're able to direct it in a good way that makes sense, because ideas want to live. And that's why if you're sitting with it, it'll move on to someone else.
Interesting.
To a point where it's finally produced. So I think it's always important as a creative, make sure you stay inspired. Make sure that, it's I think for any creative, the excitement of the idea arriving to you is a thrill, So if you hold on to that, it's what's great, So in terms of practice, and I've worked with different people who do different things, right? And they'll say it in different ways, but I think the most common thing that comes out, and you make reference to, and we've had this conversation, right? When I run, these things come to you because that's when I'm in my most meditative stage, right? You really need to be in a quiet environment, in a calm environment for your thoughts to be able to boil. And I worked with one creative who used to say before, and I would be walking around and I'd see him brainstorming and he'd have his eyes closed, right? And that was his thing, like he'd close his eyes. I'm like, what are you doing? Are you taking a nap here during 1 hour? Like, what is this? But in hindsight, he's getting into a meditative space. He's getting to a calm place where if an idea is going to pass through him, he can latch onto it because he silenced everything else around him.
So there's the argument about ideas, then there's the argument about execution. Right? So if I happen to be, let's stick with the theme, Yabuloyi. I'm walking around, this idea hits me, boom. And now it's sitting with me. Now there's a responsibility to do something with that idea, right? As you said, if I don't do something,
and we should feel that responsibility.
It moves on, right? And I think a big part of where the world is at now is that we've got so many problems. The theory that the idea will come to me should be connected to the fact that the idea should be able to help build society or solve for our societal problems.
Potentially.
Do you have an example of an idea that has come to you that has allowed you to connect the dot between this thing that you've now received and the ability to solve something for the world?
I think, so look, without giving away too much, some of this is IPA, so can't get into
you can describe it in broad strokes.
We can't get into heavy detail, But to your point, and I think a lot of people will find that they resonate with the question that you're asking.
Yes.
Whether we've been able to get to a point of execution and build it out is a different story,
Yeah.
right? But essentially, for me, that's the crux of what creativity will do. And then when I speak about that fertile land that you're creating for the idea to grow, it's really based on your insights and what you know and your knowledge, right? So a lot of these ideas come to you because you've lived through an experience where, shoot, these shoelaces are rubbish. I can't, or the first person to say, I need shoelaces. What was that about? There was a problem that they were experiencing with a shoe or whatever it is. So I think all of that is dependent on your surroundings. I think if you can use your surroundings and leverage those as inspiration, as a tool for you to gain insights, you can then be able to get the idea. And then moving on to execution, I think then requires a whole lot more, I think it's much easier to come up with the idea than it is to execute. Whether it be ideas that require funding in this good old country of ours, whether they require connections, there's so many challenges I think that hinder people, from those. But a simple reference, not of my own, I think there was a lady who blew up a couple of years ago who created these solar-powered backpacks, right? Again, I think she was trying to solve a societal issue. Yeah. There was a good idea there, but based off the insight that she knew growing up that I couldn't study at night because I didn't have lights, So here's a backpack that would charge, and then when you get home, it gives you light for you to study. Yeah. And I think that's the reality is, and I'm sure of this, and I'm sure of this fact, is that we all have those ideas. Yeah. Because it's in our human nature to be creative and to try to answer to a problem that we're all experiencing. But the execution part, like you say, is really, really difficult.
Yeah, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Yeah. Last question, my man. Is creative genius born or is it made? I'm going off script. It's an impossible question.
That is a wild question, man. Is
it born or is it made?
Is creative genius born or is it made? I think it's born.
It's born, right?
I think it's born. I believe that it's born, right? And then I believe that you can either, so it's like with anything that's birthed. Yeah. It can either be nurtured or it can either be killed.
Fair point.
Do you know what I mean?
Fair point.
So in that sense, it is born. I think the people who get to the heights of it are the people whose lives have enabled them to nurture it the most, right. Who've been inspired the most, who've been able to really come back to that source of creativity and that source of what they were born and created with.
Got it.
So it's not exclusive, this thing.
Yeah. Ulu is not exclusive.
No, Ulu is not exclusive.
Thanks, man. Good chatting. We'll speak soon.
Be sure to tune into the next episode of Brave Conversations.